And Shana Tova, Gmar Chatima Tova to all of you in the Vilna Shul family connecting with us to this sacred space on this Yom Kippur. I am honored and I am humbled to be here on this hill, this beacon of a hill, standing in the light of all those who recently and for more than 100 years have devoted their hearts and their souls to this sacred place. As I listen today to the voices of so many friends and family and people from my community during these challenging times, I must admit, these do not feel like days of awe, more like days of awful. People crying out, bemoaning how bad it or everything is. This is not a new behavior in Jewish tradition. We specialize in it. We cried out, hoping God would answer time and again. We endured evolutionary crises and offered revolutionary responses that define so much of who we are today. In Psalm 21, we cried out, Asa einai el haharim, me'ayin yavo ezri. I lift up my eyes towards the hills and ask, where will my help come from? Today I am here in this place to suggest to you that our help will come from this hill, from this place on which we stand, these walls, and the souls who called this place their spiritual home. But crying out was not limited to one verse in one psalm. In Psalm 118, Min ha-metzar karatiya, anani v'merchavya, from the narrow space, God, I call out to you. Answer me with divine expanse. And this afternoon, later in the liturgy of Yom Kippur, in the Mincha service, we read the book of Jonah. Jonah is in the belly of the whale that swallowed him as he was tossed overboard for being the source of the storms that threatened the lives of everyone on board. He cried out to God as the waters closed in on him. The weeds twined around his head. He could not breathe. And he cried out, I will sacrifice for you and do what you have asked. And he is vomited out on dry land. And finally, from the book of Exodus, the loudest, most collective cry of our people, the king of Egypt died. The children of Israel cried out from their enslavement, and their cry rose all the way up to God. Today on Yom Kippur, we are asked to touch death, to dress in clothing that recalls the burial shroud, to experience hunger and thirst and afflict our souls. Hours from now, the shofar will call us back to life, to hope, to next year in Jerusalem. But friends, I offer you this. It is not Jonah, nor the authors of the Psalms, or our enslaved ancestors in Egypt, to whom we turn on this Yom Kippur for wisdom and inspiration and teaching on what we must do exactly now in these days of awful. It is toward a group of Lithuanian Jewish immigrants, Litvaks, immigrants on this hill who are speaking to us, shouting to us across time. They hold the key to our much-needed revolutionary response. They left the old country at times of great violence, pogroms and anti-Semitism. They risked the perils of immigration, crossing to the unknown, to come here to Boston. According to the Boston Globe, here on the backside of this beacon of a hill, in what had been the heart of the Black community in 1893, they formed a community and worshiped together. The other side of the hill faced the Boston Commons and the public gardens. That's where the rich folks live. Nearby, this community bought the former 12th Baptist Church on Phillip Street and transformed it into a synagogue in 1909. And I quote, "But the city took that building by eminent domain in order to expand the neighboring school. The congregation was given $20,000 compensation. They decided to build a brick synagogue with a large Star of David window just down the street from the old building, end quote. Resilient, faithful, believers in the power of community, they did something wonderful, but on the surface, not utterly remarkable or miraculous. But please now listen to me carefully. Adjust your Zoom cameras, tweak the volume, focus on the small screen for this very big message. The new shul they built, this building, opened in 1919. 1919, World War I had just ended, and a global flu pandemic claimed 25 to 50 million lives around the world. 500,000 to some estimates almost 700,000 here in the United States of America. The flu, the pandemic, was still ever present. People then were told, stay at home, wear masks, practice good hygiene, social distance from others. Literally, the technology of pandemic behavior has not changed in 100 years. They had to grieve the losses in their families and in their world, losses from the war and losses from the plague. They had to face a glaring truth without denial or reservation. The destiny of their community was in their hands. In the midst of post-World War pandemic, they rebuilt their shul. I stand in awe. On Yom Kippur last year, 5,780, none of us, could have understood what that actually means. Today, on day 10 of 5781, I can say from the depths of this expansive space, not narrow and constraining, not the belly of a whale, a space that fills me and does not deprive me of breath. Thank you, God, for sustaining us, providing for us, and allowing us to be alive and reach this awesome day. Gratitude is cleansing for our souls, but alone it is not enough. Now we must follow their lead to transition from these days described as awful to the awe-filled days ahead of us. On this Yom Kippur day, this day of trial before the high court above and the high court below, not only to account for our deeds of the year gone by, but to make commitments we know will be difficult to fulfill in the year ahead. We are called upon, as they were 100 years ago, to respond in ways both evolutionary and revolutionary, inspired by their example. Later on this Yom Kippur, the liturgy of Seder Avodah will be offered in synagogues around the world. Avodah can be translated as work, but also as prayer and as service. We will recall a time when the temple, the Beit HaMikdash in Jerusalem, stood. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, entered the Devir, the Holy of Holies, once during the year, on this day at that time, to plead for salvation for the entire community. The temple was destroyed by the Romans. The priests of temple service transformed into local rabbis who led the community, led by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, much like the spirit of the immigrants 100 years ago here in Boston, grieved for the fallen temple, for the dead, for the missing. They told each other and the people at that time the truth as the folks searched for answers, for a future amidst terrible uncertainty. They told them the truth that the Romans burned down the temple, but our internal divisions, our divisiveness, our sinat chinam, our senseless hatred, weakened us within, made us vulnerable to forces outside that sought to destroy us and our failing governing institutions. Those rabbis, like our Lithuanian Jewish immigrant ancestors, carried with them the traditions of avodah, of work, of prayer, of service to the community. They created new rituals, new communities, knowing their lives as Jews and human beings would be forever changed. They knew the destiny of their community was in their hands. They had to embrace what Admiral James Stockdale said, reflecting on the Vietnam War. He was a POW of that war, a hero. And he eventually ran for the vice presidency of the United States of America. His words coined as the Stockdale paradox. He said, "You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they may be." To my mind, among the most brutal facts we must face are the murder of George Floyd, the flagrant injustice in the shooting death of Breonna Taylor, and the sad, gut-wrenching, often lonely deaths of 205,000 people in this country and almost 1 million around the globe. There was no one to rescue George Floyd from the narrow place where he could not breathe, as we witnessed his murder on television again and again. And for Breonna, we have a right to see what the grand jury saw and justice served. We must mourn and we must grieve. We must acknowledge uncomfortable truths about our own behaviors, our privilege, and the depths of systemic racism. And we must do the work, do the work, do the work, and the prayer and the protest. As Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said as he marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the era of the struggle for civil rights in this country. And he said, praying with our feet, that is what marching is. And the service that he served, that we are called to rise up to today, revolutionary, not incremental responses. And for those who have died from this virus, this plague of our time, we must mourn and grieve. We must insist that the truth of the failures that contributed to their deaths be acknowledged. We need to do better, as the virus can get worse. Viktor Frankl, the survivor of the Holocaust, urged us all to pay heed and not live in resignation. And I quote, "When we are no longer able to change the situation, we can change ourselves. We aspire to live up, to be like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and those on this hill, this beacon of a hill, 101 years ago. Crying out is not enough. Despair and waiting for deliverance from the narrow place, the belly of the whale, our own Egypt, is not the revolutionary response that these walls, that these founders are here to teach us. They beseech us on this day to do the work, rebuild community, rise above senseless hatred. They did it in the middle of a plague, at the edges of a devastating world war. Now it is up to us. Som Kal, a continued meaningful fast. Gemar Chatima Tova. May you be inscribed and sealed in the book of life in Shana Tova.